When I turned 65, I threw a party for the family. No one came. I had set everything up carefully. The table was decorated, the lights were dimmed just right, and the food was prepared with love. The smell of my homemade roast filled the house, a scent that used to bring everyone together. I had invited my children, my closest friends, everyone who was important to me. I had done everything in my power to make sure this was a celebration to remember. But as I stood in the middle of my dining room, waiting for them to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease. It wasn't like them to forget a family gathering. Not like this. As the clock ticked past the hour of 6 p.m., the feeling of loneliness began to set in. By 7 o'clock, I had already called Richard, my son. The phone rang, but he didn't pick up. I called my daughter, Lily, the same result. I tried not to panic. Maybe there was traffic, or maybe they had gotten caught up in something at work. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. They were all supposed to be here. By 8 o'clock, my heart sank. I had checked my phone 3 times, but there were no messages, no calls. I was starting to wonder if they even remembered. I walked into the kitchen and pulled the roast out of the oven. It was now cold, just like my hopes for the evening. I set it aside and walked back to the dining room, staring at the empty chairs. They were supposed to be filled with the laughter and warmth of the people I loved. I took a deep breath and tried to push the feeling of abandonment out of my mind. But that's when I saw it. A post from Jessica, my best friend, on Facebook. There they all were, smiling and laughing, enjoying a cruise. The caption read, "Living our best life on the Mediterranean. So grateful for this amazing family getaway." My heart dropped. My family, the people I had spent my life caring for, had chosen to be somewhere else. They were all there, smiling, and I wasn't even part of it. I had spent hours cooking, decorating, and preparing for a night I thought we could all enjoy together. Instead, I was left standing in an empty room, staring at a screen, heartbroken. I waited for someone to call me, to apologize, to explain. But nothing came. I looked down at the phone in my hand, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes. They hadn't even bothered to pretend. I knew then that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't just an oversight. They had planned this. I didn't know why, or what had changed, but I knew my family had chosen to leave me out of their lives. I couldn't stop the tears that finally came. Not because I was angry, but because the truth had settled in. My own family, the people I had loved and sacrificed for, had betrayed me. And as the night stretched on, I realized I had to find a way to take back control. They had already taken so much from me, and now, it was my turn. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. The photos of my family laughing, enjoying their time on a cruise, were a slap in the face. I felt a coldness settle inside me. This wasn't just a missed birthday. This was betrayal. I sat there, motionless, as the weight of what had just happened sank in. My heart had broken, not from a single action, but from the years of little moments leading up to this one. The small excuses, the quiet distancing, and now this open disregard. I hadn't even received a call. Not from Richard, not from Lily. Not even a simple message to apologize for their absence. They had all decided, without saying it, that I no longer mattered. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I had raised my children, loved them, supported them through everything. And now, it felt like I didn't exist anymore. I walked to the window and looked outside, but there was nothing to see, just the quiet street. The world continued, oblivious to the hurt I was feeling. I sat down on the couch, feeling the tears threaten again, but I held them back. I wouldn't let them have that power over me. I had given everything, and now it was time to take something back. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. I would figure out what to do next. I wouldn't let them think that they could discard me like this. The betrayal wasn't just about the party. It was about the years of sacrifices, the missed conversations, the distance that had been growing between us for so long. I had been blind to it, accepting the small hurts as part of life, but now, they had made their choice clear. And as much as it hurt, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep accepting the scraps they tossed my way. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant cutting ties with the people I had always called family. This was my life, my future, and I was done being overlooked. The next day, I made a decision. I was going to gather the proof I needed to expose everything. The truth had to come out. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. But more than that, I needed to reclaim my life, my dignity. And I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. I woke up the next morning, the weight of the previous night still heavy on my chest. I stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. I had no more tears to cry, only a sharp sense of determination. I was done being the victim. I was done being the one left behind. It was time to take control. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. The house was silent, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the steam rising in the quiet morning air. I needed to plan. I couldn't just let this go. I had spent too many years in silence, accepting their neglect and disrespect, but no more. I had the right to stand up for myself. I had worked too hard, given too much, and now, it was time to make sure they saw the truth. I took out my phone and opened the files I had been quietly gathering. Bank statements, emails, texts, everything that would prove how deep the betrayal ran. I had spent hours last night collecting evidence, and now, with everything in front of me, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't just doing this to get back at them. I was doing it to reclaim my dignity, to make sure they knew that their actions had consequences. The more I looked at the evidence, the more it all made sense. The shady deals, the lies they had told, the way they had used me as a tool for their own gain. They thought they could control me, thought I would just sit back and take it. But they were wrong. I wasn't the helpless woman they believed me to be. I had been patient, yes, but I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of power rise within me. It was time to confront them, to show them that I wasn't afraid. I was ready to expose the truth. The betrayal had gone far beyond just a missed birthday or a forgotten promise. This was about my life, my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone destroy that. I stood up from the table, grabbed my phone, and began to dial the number of my lawyer. It was time to make sure Jessica and Mark knew that I wasn't just a passive participant in this game anymore. I was ready to fight. The next few days were a blur. I spoke with the lawyer, made the necessary arrangements, and prepared for the confrontation. There was no turning back now. I knew it would be difficult, that it would shake everything I had known, but I also knew that it was the only way to move forward. As I sat down with the lawyer and discussed the next steps, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about punishing Jessica and Mark. It was about protecting myself and making sure they couldn't hurt me or my family again. The lawyer assured me that I had a strong case. All I had to do was expose the lies, and they would have no choice but to face the consequences. The plan was set. The next time I saw Jessica, I would show her everything I had uncovered. I would make her see that her actions had been foolish, that she could no longer hide behind her lies. And I wasn't going to let Mark off the hook either. He had been complicit in everything. He had betrayed me just as much as Jessica had. The day of the confrontation finally came. I could feel my heart pounding as I prepared to meet Jessica. I had spent days thinking about how I would approach her, what I would say, but now that the moment was here, I felt calm. It was time to expose the truth. Jessica had no idea what was coming. She thought she had gotten away with everything, but she was wrong. I was going to make sure she saw just how wrong she was. I arrived at the cafe early, just as we had agreed. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweaty. I had thought about this moment for days, rehearsing what I would say, what I would show her. But now that I was here, in the moment, I felt an unexpected calm. I wasn't sure if it was because I was finally ready, or because I had already made peace with the fact that this would change everything. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where people came to have long, intimate conversations. It was the perfect place to finally confront Jessica. I had called her earlier that day, asking if we could meet to talk. She had hesitated, but I pushed for it. I needed this. I needed her to hear the truth, to finally understand the weight of what she had done. I ordered a coffee, and as I sat there waiting, I reflected on everything that had led to this moment. All the years of friendship, all the trust one had placed in her. I couldn't even recognize the woman I had called my best friend. Jessica walked in, looking as confident as ever. She was always so put together, her perfect smile and polished demeanor never failing to make her the center of attention. But today, something was different. There was a nervousness in her step, a hesitation in her eyes as she saw me sitting there, waiting. She took a deep breath and approached the table. "Hey, Sam," she said, sitting down across from me. Her voice sounded a little too forced, and I could see the discomfort in her eyes. I didn't greet her back. Instead, I just slid the folder across the table. Her eyes flickered down to it, then quickly back up to me, but she didn't say anything. "What's this?" she asked, still trying to maintain her calm. "It's the truth," I replied, my voice steady but cold. "I've been patient, Jessica, but not anymore." She looked at the folder, then back at me, her expression shifting slightly. "Sam, what are you talking about?" she asked, though I could see the guilt creeping in her eyes. I took a deep breath. "The money, the lies, the business deals you and Mark have been hiding from me. I know everything." I paused, watching her face. I didn't need to say more. She knew what I was referring to. She knew what she had done. Her face flushed. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. "Sam, she started, but I cut her off. "No, don't say anything. Just listen," I said, my voice sharp. "I've spent my whole life trusting you. I've supported you, shared my life with you. And you've been taking advantage of that. You've been stealing from me, from my family, and you didn't even think twice about it. You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought you could just walk away with everything and leave me in the dust." Jessica's face turned pale, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I could see the guilt starting to break through her calm exterior, but it was too late. "You've hurt me more than anyone ever could, Jessica. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised my hand, stopping her. "I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to show you who you really are," I said, standing up. I walked around to her side of the table and slid my phone in front of her. "This is everything. All the transactions, the emails, the text messages. It's all here. You can't hide anymore." Jessica looked at the screen, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. She started to tremble, and I could see her mask of confidence crumbling. She had no way out. I had already done my part. Now, it was her turn to face the truth. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are," I said quietly. "Your lies will be exposed, and there's nothing you can do about it." For a moment, there was silence between us. Jessica just stared at the phone, her hands trembling. I could see her trying to come up with something, some excuse, but she couldn't. She was trapped. I watched her, not with anger, but with a strange sense of finality. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't the victim anymore. I had taken back control, and now, it was time for her to deal with the consequences of her actions. I watched Jessica as she stared at the phone screen in front of her. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The truth was there, in black and white, and there was no way for her to deny it. All the lies, all the manipulation, everything she had done to me was laid out for her to see. I waited for her to say something, but she couldn't. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence between us grew, thick and suffocating, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt calm. This wasn't just about exposing her. It was about reclaiming the control I had lost. I had been drowning in the weight of her betrayal, but now I was standing tall, and I wasn't going to back down. Jessica swallowed hard, her eyes flickering between the screen and my face. I knew she was trying to find an excuse, some way to shift the blame, but she was trapped. "This isn't what it looks like, Sam," she finally said, her voice shaky. I didn't even flinch. "What exactly do you think it looks like, Jessica?" I asked, my voice steady, cold. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words caught in her throat. I could see her fighting to hold it together, but it was useless. The evidence was irrefutable. "You've been using me, manipulating me, and now you're trying to play the victim? How do you think that's going to go over when everyone finds out the truth?" Her face went pale, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything she had done. The lies, the secrets, the betrayal. No amount of guilt or regret was going to erase the damage she had caused. "You have to understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want any of this. It just happened." I shook my head, cutting her off. "No, Jessica. You made this choice. You chose to deceive me. You chose to betray my trust for your own gain. And now you're going to face the consequences." She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, but I didn't feel any sympathy for her. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I could finally stand up for myself and take back what was mine. "What do you want from me, Sam?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want you to understand that this isn't going to go away," I said, my words firm. "You're going to face the consequences of your actions. And when I'm done, everyone will know exactly who you are." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You can't hide from this anymore. The truth is out, Jessica, and there's nothing you can do to take it back. For the first time in our conversation, she looked truly defeated. Her shoulders slumped, and she lowered her gaze to the table. I watched her for a moment, feeling a sense of finality settle over me. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I wasn't going to sit back and let her walk all over me. I stood up, collecting my things, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I stopped and looked back at her. She was still sitting there, her head down, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. You know, I said, my voice softening for the first time, I used to consider you a friend. But now you're just a lesson. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long had finally been lifted. I didn't have to carry it anymore. I didn't have to live in the shadow of her betrayal. I was done being her victim. It was my time to move on, to reclaim my life, and to finally leave all the lies behind. I walked away from the cafe feeling like I had finally let go of something that had been weighing on me for years. The relief was immediate, but as I stepped out into the crisp air, I realized there was more to be done. The confrontation with Jessica wasn't the end of it. In fact, it was only the beginning. I had spent too long being passive, too long letting people like her dictate my life. Now, it was time to take control of everything. I had to make sure that Jessica understood the consequences of her actions, but I also had to protect myself. I couldn't allow her, or anyone else, to believe they could walk all over me and get away with it. That evening, after the confrontation, I sat down with my phone, staring at the screen. I could still see Jessica's face, her wide eyes, the tremble in her hands as she tried to process everything. But I couldn't afford to feel sorry for her anymore. She had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. I contacted my lawyer again, making sure that everything was in place to move forward with legal action if necessary. I had the evidence, documents, text messages, emails, everything that proved Jessica and Mark's betrayal. I wasn't just going to expose Jessica to our social circle. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I wasn't going to be a victim in this situation anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, Mark was out running errands, and the kids were at school. I had a moment to breathe. I took my time getting ready, allowing myself a moment of peace before the storm. As I prepared to send out the message, I hesitated. This was the final step. Once I took this action, there would be no going back. But I knew it was necessary. For too long, I had kept quiet, allowed myself to be manipulated, and played the role of the forgiving friend, the supportive wife. But now I was done. I pulled up the email draft, a brief but direct message to our close friends, our colleagues, everyone who had been a part of our life together. I attached the evidence and hit send. It was done. I could already imagine the fallout, but it didn't matter. I had to do this. As the hours passed, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what I had just done. There was a sense of relief, yes, but also a quiet sadness. I had hoped for a different outcome, one where I could trust the people closest to me, one where betrayal didn't feel like a necessary consequence. But it wasn't my fault. I had done the right thing. I had stood up for myself. When Jessica saw the email, she was livid. I knew she would be. She tried to call me, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't going to get caught in her lies again. I had made my decision, and now it was time to live with it. As the days passed, I heard from friends who were shocked by the news. Some were supportive, others were confused, but no one could deny the truth. The evidence spoke for itself. Jessica tried to play the victim, but no one was buying it. They all knew the kind of person she was, and now they saw her for who she really was. I felt a sense of empowerment as I watched her world begin to crumble. I had taken back control, and that was all that mattered. It wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. I wasn't going to allow anyone to take advantage of me anymore. And as for Jessica, well, she would have to live with the consequences of her actions. She had made her choices, and now it was my turn to make mine. And I wasn't going to back down. I woke up to a flood of notifications on my phone. Messages, emails, and calls were pouring in. My inbox was full, my phone was vibrating nonstop, and I could feel my heart race as I scrolled through them. It wasn't the responses I was expecting. Some were shocked, others were supportive, but the majority came from people I hadn't heard from in years. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives who I hadn't thought of in ages. They were all reaching out, processing what had happened. Some were offering apologies. Others were expressing disbelief. But they all seemed to agree on one thing. They hadn't seen Jessica for who she truly was. It felt strange, the way people who had been so distant were now showing up in my life again. I knew I had made the right decision, but the reality of it was still sinking in. I had exposed Jessica for who she was, and now the truth was out. There, for everyone to see. But as the day went on, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss. Not for Jessica. She had made her choices, and now she would have to deal with the fallout. But for the years I had spent trusting her, I felt foolish, like I had been living in a fog for too long. I had ignored the signs, brushed off the small things, believing the best in her. And now, here I was, left to pick up the pieces of what was once a friendship. My phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Mark. I hesitated before opening it. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear anything from him. But I opened it anyway. Sam, I know what's happening, and I just want you to know that I never meant for things to get this far. Please, we need to talk. I stared at the message, my emotions a whirlwind. Talk. What was there left to talk about? He had been complicit in all of this, choosing Jessica over me, over our family. And now he was trying to salvage something that was already broken beyond repair. I didn't know what I was expecting when I opened the message, but this wasn't it. I didn't respond right away. I sat there for a moment, thinking about everything that had led up to this. The years of trust, the family dinners, the holidays, the way everything had been torn apart in such a short time. I thought about my children, how they had seen the dynamic shift, how they had been caught in the middle of all of this. They didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this. I was done trying to fix something that was beyond repair. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. It was time to take the next step. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for things to fall into place. I needed to move forward, for my own peace of mind. I needed to make sure that Jessica and Mark understood that there were consequences to their actions. This wasn't going to end with a few messages and empty apologies. It was going to end with me taking control of my life. After I got off the phone with the lawyer, I sat back for a moment, letting the reality of everything wash over me. I had been holding on to hope for far too long. Hope that things would get better, that people would change, that things would go back to the way they were. But that wasn't going to happen. Not now. I had made the decision to stop being the person who let everyone walk all over them. I was no longer going to let people like Jessica and Mark dictate my life. They had shown me their true colors, and now it was time to show them mine. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power. The power to move on, to rebuild, and to live my life on my terms. The power to heal and make sure that the people who betrayed me would never have the chance to hurt me again. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one in control. I had spent the last few days in a haze, sorting through the aftermath of my decisions. The world around me felt different, almost unreal, as if everything had shifted into a new place I didn't recognize. The air was heavier somehow, and each step I took felt like it was carrying more weight than it should. But despite the overwhelming emotions, there was a strange sense of clarity that had begun to settle in. I had done the right thing. I had exposed the truth, and now it was time to face the fallout. Mark called again, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already heard everything he had to say, or at least, I thought I had. He had asked for forgiveness, begged me to understand. But how could I? He had chosen Jessica over me. He had lied, betrayed me, and thought he could get away with it. And even now, he was still trying to manipulate me. The thought of speaking to him again made my stomach turn. I had given him years of trust, and he had shattered it in a matter of moments. No amount of apologies would fix that. I couldn't go back. The damage was done. I had already moved on. The next day, I woke up to another round of messages. This time, it was people who had heard about what had happened, people who had been close to Jessica and Mark, and now, they were starting to see the truth for themselves. Some of them were angry at me for exposing them. Others felt sorry for me. But the majority had nothing but silence to offer. It was almost as if they were ashamed of what they had been a part of. And yet, despite the silence, despite the judgment from some, I couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer trapped in this web of lies. I was free. Free to move forward with my life. free to choose who I wanted to trust, and free to never allow anyone to manipulate me again. As the days went on, the reactions to my actions continued to trickle in. People were starting to piece together what had happened, and their responses were varied. Some were still in shock, others began to distance themselves, and a few reached out to offer support. But there was one thing that was clear. Jessica and Mark's lives had been upended. The business deals they had been hiding were coming to light. The lies they had spun were unraveling in front of them. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction knowing that they were finally being held accountable for their actions. As I sat at the kitchen table one evening, I thought about everything that had transpired. The people who had once been my closest friends, my family, were now strangers. But despite the loss, I felt no regret. I had chosen my own peace, my own happiness over their toxic presence in my life. I had taken back control, and that was something they could never take away from me. I glanced at the phone on the table, knowing I would have to make some hard decisions in the coming days. There would be more confrontations, more truths to be faced, and perhaps even more people to cut ties with. But for now, I was content with where I stood. I had walked away from their betrayal, and I was stronger for it. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about reclaiming my life. I didn't need their approval, their support, or their apologies. What mattered now was what I was going to do next. And for the first time in a long while, I felt empowered to face whatever came my way. I spent the next few days feeling oddly detached, as if I was watching my life from the outside. It wasn't numbness, but a quiet clarity that settled deep inside. I had no idea how long I had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, it was almost surreal. The aftermath of everything, the confrontations, the decisions, the pain, had unfolded in a way I couldn't have imagined. The response to what I had done was just beginning to ripple through my circle, and already, the dynamics had shifted. Some people I'd once considered friends had distanced themselves, others tried to offer their sympathy, but it didn't matter. I was no longer trying to hold on to people who didn't see my worth. I had come to realize that I had spent too many years fighting to fit into a world that wasn't built for me. What mattered now was what I was going to build for myself. I had made the decision to walk away from Jessica, from Mark, from everything they had represented. There were no more second chances, no more hoping things would get better. I had given them more than enough of my time, my energy, and my heart, and now, I was reclaiming all of that for myself. I looked at the pieces of my life scattered around me. The house, the career I had built, my children, and I knew that I was starting fresh. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt the weight of my decision, the emptiness that came with the absence of the people I had trusted. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had already been living in their shadows for far too long. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love if it came with conditions. I was enough. I was going to make sure that everything I did moving forward would reflect that truth. Mark, of course, tried to contact me again. His messages were increasingly desperate, filled with apologies and pleas for me to just talk to him. But I ignored them. Every word he sent was a reminder of how far he had gone to break my trust. I wasn't going to let him back in. I wasn't going to allow myself to be manipulated again. The phone calls from mutual friends and acquaintances didn't stop either. Some were genuinely concerned, others were simply curious. But none of them knew the full story. None of them understood what it was like to be on the receiving end of betrayal, of manipulation, of years of silent sacrifice. They didn't know what it was like to feel invisible, to be the last priority in a world that you had worked so hard to create. It didn't matter anymore. I had nothing to prove to them. As the days passed, I started focusing on what truly mattered, my children, my career, and most importantly, my peace of mind. I had spent too much of my life putting others first, and now it was my turn to take care of myself. I spent time with my kids, showing them that they were my priority, and slowly but surely, I started rebuilding the relationships that had been strained by the chaos of the last few months. They were the ones who had been by my side all along, the ones who never betrayed me, and I was going to show them how much I appreciated them. I also started focusing more on my work, taking on projects I had put off for years. I found a sense of fulfillment in my career that I hadn't realized I was missing. There was something empowering about working on something that was entirely my own. I felt alive again, like I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. I took a trip by myself to clear my head, something I hadn't done in years. I walked along the beach, letting the waves wash over my feet, and I felt the weight of everything I had endured finally begin to lift. I had made it through the hardest part, and I was stronger because of it. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The only thing that mattered now was my own happiness. The next time Mark tried to reach out, I didn't even flinch. I deleted the message without reading it. I was done. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my terms.